The prophets of God were not perfect. They made decisions that irritated and disappointed God. They made mistakes that were unique to their character. And God's response to them was harsh but just, and it was specific to each of their particular flaw. Abraham was a doubter. The father of many nations doubted God 4 times, so God gave him the ultimate test of faith. Luckily, Abraham passed and his covenant with God was confirmed. The first time Abraham doubted God was in Genesis chapter 12. Abraham and his family traveled to Egypt because there was a famine in Canaan. But he told everyone there that Sarah is his sister instead of his wife. Abraham feared that they might kill him and take Sarah as their wife if they knew they were actually married. True enough, everyone did find Sarah beautiful, including the Pharaoh. Pharaoh summoned her to his chambers, but before they could sleep together, God appeared to Pharaoh and warned him of the consequences if he sleeps with Sarah. Pharaoh was terrified and he gave Sarah back to Abraham and ordered them to leave Egypt. So Abraham and his family left Egypt and God left Pharaoh alone. The second time that Abraham doubted God was in Genesis 20. This time Abraham and his family traveled to Gerar because of a famine again. Surprisingly, when they went there, the same sequence of events happened. Abraham lied about his marriage with Sarah. King Abimelech was infatuated with Sarah's beauty and almost slept with her. God warned and threatened him. The king was terrified and confronted Abraham, and finally Abraham and Sarah left the kingdom and settled in a land nearby. In both cases, Abraham didn't believe in God's ability to protect him. He relied on his own abilities because he thought he didn't need God's help. He didn't even pray to God for protection. As a result, Abraham nearly allowed Sarah to sleep with 2 other men. And the 2 men who were completely innocent were almost punished by God, all because Abraham doubted God's ability to protect him. He relied on his own cunning and lies, which could have resulted badly if God didn't intervene. It is such a disappointing behavior from someone who was being blessed and favored by God. Abraham was truly a doubter. He didn't only doubt God's ability to protect, he also doubted God's ability to provide, specifically to provide him with land and riches. In Genesis chapter 15, God literally promised Abraham that he would receive vast lands and possessions, but Abraham still doubted God and asked for an assurance. He doubted God's promise, so God gave instructions for him to follow. Abraham obeyed the instructions and God's promise was confirmed. The last example of Abraham being a doubter is his doubt towards God's ability to provide him with a son. And who can blame him? He and Sarah were already very old when God promised them a son of their own. In Genesis chapter 17, God promised Abraham a son from Sarah that will be his heir. Abraham bowed down to the ground while receiving God's promise, but he was laughing in his mind because he believed that having a son at his age and at Sarah's age is impossible. But God, in his sovereignty and might, did give them a son and they named him Isaac. And the family lived happily together. Abraham had doubted God 4 times. Even though God didn't confront Abraham about this doubt didn't sit well with God, for God wants us to have complete faith in him.
Hebrews chapter 11 verse 6. And without faith, it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists, and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him.
Because Abraham showed doubt towards God's ability to protect and provide, God gave him the ultimate test of faith. God instructed Abraham to sacrifice his son Isaac as a burnt offering.
Genesis chapter 22 verse 19. He said, "Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering upon one of the mountains of which I shall tell you."
This time, Abraham actually obeyed God and sacrificed his son without question and without hesitation. Abraham was holding the knife and was about to kill Isaac when all of a sudden the angel of the Lord appeared to Abraham and told him to stop. The angel explained that it was all a test from God to measure his faith. The angel announced to Abraham that he has proven his complete faith. Abraham passed the test and God was pleased. We can all see ourselves in Abraham. There will be times in our lives when we will doubt God. No one is immune to this. Even the father of many nations didn't have complete faith in the Lord. This happened more than 2,000 years ago, and yet we still experience the same things to this day. People still doubt God's ability to protect and provide for us. People still rely on their own abilities to survive and thrive in this world. Our knowledge and hard work can get us far in life, but with God's almighty help, the possibilities are endless. There is no mountain that God can't move, There is no storm that God can't wither. There is no problem in this world that God can't solve. So why should we carry the burden of our problems alone? Why should we analyze our own problems ourselves when the capacity of our minds has a limit and God is limitless? Why should we face our problems alone when our time and energy are finite and God is infinite? Why should we rely on ourselves when we are capable of making mistakes and God is infallible?
Matthew chapter 19, verse 26. Jesus looked at them and said, "With man this is impossible, but with God all things are possible."
What God wants us to do is to have complete faith and obedience to Him. God doesn't want us to rely on our own limited capabilities. Instead, He wants us to surrender and submit and allow Him to guide our paths.
Proverbs chapter 3, verses 5 to 8. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to Him, and He will make your paths straight. Do not be wise in your own eyes. Fear the Lord and shun evil. This will bring health to your body and nourishment to your bones.
Many of us, when we face difficult situations, we often rely on our own and forget God's help, just like Abraham. Abraham was indeed able to prevent other people from killing him, but because of his actions, Sarah almost had sexual relationships with two innocent men, and God almost punished them because of Abraham's lies. Similar to Abraham, we have experienced fully solving a particular problem only to encounter several unforeseen consequences that emerge from it, which leads us to solving these additional problems, which will then produce even more, and the cycle continues. The outcome would be either the consistent consecutive problems will consume our lives, or we would finally ask the assistance of God. So why prolong the misery? We will eventually end up asking for God's help anyway, so it is practical to do it the moment we encounter a problem. The lesson we can learn from Abraham is that the best way to handle a problem in our life is for God to be a part of the solution. We can pray for God to give us an idea to solve the problem. We can pray for God to give us the strength to face it. We can even pray for God to resolve it Himself. Whatever we encounter on our daily life, we absolutely need God's help and guidance to navigate around our obstacles.
James chapter 1, verses 5 to 8. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given him. But let him ask in faith, with no doubting, for the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. For that person must not suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. 1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 5. That your faith might not rest in the wisdom of men, but in the power of God.
Moreover, we shouldn't doubt God. We must avoid doubting God's ability to protect and provide. Instead, we must trust Him completely. Similar to Abraham, God will give us a test of faith if we consistently question His divinity and sovereignty. And just like Abraham, we must accept God's test and we must overcome and pass it. Because this test is not a punishment. Instead, it is an opportunity to correct our flaws. God doesn't want us to doubt Him. God wants us to experience His blessings and grace. God wants us to be better. God wants the doubt that lingers within us to be replaced with faith. Because it is only through faith that we can be saved. And because Abraham passed this test, he can't be called Abraham the doubter anymore, but Abraham the faithful. Similarly, when we pass our individual test, we would also be His faithful children.
1 John chapter 5, verse 4. For everyone who has been born of God overcomes the world. And this is the victory that has overcome the world, our faith. Ephesians chapter 6, verse 16. In all circumstances take up the shield of faith, with which you can extinguish all the flaming darts of the evil one. Matthew chapter 17, verse 20. He said to them, because of your little faith. For truly I say to you, if you have faith like a grain of mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you. Matthew chapter 21, verses 21 to 22. And Jesus answered them, truly I say to you, if you have faith and do not doubt, you will not only do what has been done to the fig tree, but even if you say to this mountain, be taken up and thrown into the sea, it will happen. And whatever you ask in prayer, you will receive if you have faith. Ephesians chapter 2, verses 8 to 9. For by grace you have been saved through faith. And this is not your own doing. It is the gift of God, not a result of works, so that no one may boast.